All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're diving into, a pretty powerful story, I think, and one that has really stuck with people over the years. It's, of course, the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, and you'll find that in Luke chapter 16.
Yeah, classic story.
And we've got some fascinating stuff to unpack alongside it, too.
Right, a sermon called The Great Chasm that was given just recently at Covenant Presbyterian. Then we're also going to pull in some verses from Psalm 41.
Nice. So really digging into wealth, poverty, and those connections that we make or sometimes fail to make in our lives.
Absolutely. That's exactly what we're looking at, yeah.
So let's just jump right in.
Let's do it.
What always gets me about this parable is how vivid that opening scene is. You've got this unnamed rich man, living it up, total luxury, and right there at his gate is Lazarus, a beggar covered in sores.
Yeah. No, it's a striking image, and I think that's the point, right?
Yeah.
It throws that inequality right in your face.
And he's just longing for even the smallest scraps from the rich man's table. It sets up this huge, this fundamental question about responsibility right from the start.
It does. And then you have this total flip, right? Their fortunes completely reverse after they die. Lazarus, he dies, and he's carried to Abraham's side, this place of, peace and honor.
Okay, yeah.
But the rich man, he also dies. And he finds himself, well, not in such a good place.
In torment, right, in Hades.
Yeah.
And he cries out for help.
He does. And it's interesting what he asks for, isn't it?
Yeah, tell me about that.
He begs Lazarus to just, dip his finger in water and just a drop to cool his tongue.
Oh, wow.
Just a tiny bit of relief from this agony.
Yeah.
And it's so striking because this guy, he used to have it all, right? And now he's desperate for this little tiny comfort.
Yeah.
But the thing is, Abraham makes it clear, between us and you, a great chasm has been set in place. So it's not just about physical distance in the afterlife.
Right. It's something bigger. It's like a symbol of, I don't know, a separation that runs deeper.
Exactly. And that great chasm, that really feels like the heart of the story,
Definitely.
But the rich man, he doesn't give up. He shifts his focus, starts worrying about his family, right?
Yeah, he wants Lazarus to warn his 5 brothers.
Yeah. It's like he's starting to realize, maybe how his life, how he lived, might have an impact on them too.
Mm.
But Abraham, again, he sort of redirects him. They have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them.
Yeah, they already have what they need.
Right. The teachings are there.
So the rich man, he pushes back. Right. He says, wouldn't it be more convincing if someone actually rose from the dead? Wouldn't that get through to them?
Yeah, he thinks, something dramatic, something supernatural, that'll finally convince them. But Abraham's response is really powerful. If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead.
So the issue isn't a lack of information.
Exactly. It's about whether they're willing to listen to what they already have.
So it would be easy to hear this parable and just think, oh yeah, that's what the rich deserve, simple justice. But the sermon, The Great Chasm, kind of challenges that, right?
It does. It makes this connection to our own lives. It points out that for a lot of us, by global standards with, our access to food, clothes, we're actually the rich.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
So it kind of takes away that comfortable distance we might feel from the rich man in the story.
Mm-hmm.
It forces us to look in the mirror a bit.
I see. Yeah, because clean water, electricity, the internet, we often take those things for granted. But yeah, that puts us in a pretty privileged position globally.
Exactly. And this isn't about feeling guilty, but it is about being honest about where we stand in relation to the parable.
Yeah, I get that.
And it's not like the gospel condemns wealth outright either, right?
Yeah.
You think about Zacchaeus.
Oh, yeah, in Luke.
Yeah, another wealthy guy Jesus interacts with. But instead of condemning him, Jesus chooses to, share a meal with him.
Right, so it's not the wealth itself. It's more about how it affects our actions and, our connections with others.
Absolutely, and particularly our connections with those who have less.
Which brings us back to that central image of the Great Chasm. Abraham says it's set in place. But how does the sermon interpret that? How does it get there?
Well, what's really fascinating is the sermon's idea that the chasm, it's not just some, divine decree, but something that grows over time. It widens through neglect.
Okay.
So the rich man, he never reached out to Lazarus. And that failure to see the suffering right there in front of him, that's what allows that gap to become this unbridgeable divide.
I see. It's not just that it's there, it's that it's allowed to grow.
Exactly. And the sermon uses this powerful historical analogy to illustrate that. It compares it to slavery and the invention of the cotton gin.
Okay, tell me about that.
Well, initially there was like more anti-slavery sentiment in the South, believe it or not.
Yeah.
But the cotton gin, it made cotton production so profitable.
Yeah.
It created this huge like economic incentive to keep slavery going. And that led to this, this widening chasm between freedom and slavery,
Yeah.
which ultimately led to, well, immense conflict.
Right, it's like those economic incentives and just that systemic neglect, they harden those divisions.
Exactly. And that historical example, it brings us to today, to this growing wealth disparity.
Yeah, the chasm is getting wider in a lot of ways.
It is. And so the question for all of us listening, it becomes, are we just letting that chasm expand, or are we actually trying to bridge it?
Right, so it's not enough to just recognize the problem, it's about what we're doing about it.
Yeah, exactly. The sermon quotes Ernest T. Campbell, and he talks about those who are burdened not by too little, but by too much, who lead lives lacking deeper purpose.
Hmm,
And he's talking about the people who never bridge that chasm.
I see. So then where do we even begin? How do we bridge this divide? It feels overwhelming sometimes.
Right, it can. But the sermon brings in some thoughts from New Testament scholar Luke Timothy Johnson.
Okay, what does he say?
Well, Johnson suggests that the Bible offers us a way of like thinking about possessions, about wealth. That's rooted in acknowledging our own poverty before God.
Okay.
So like when we truly get that our worth is a gift, not something we earn by, piling up stuff,
Mm-hmm.
it leads to a state of continual nakedness before God.
Wow, that's an image.
It is, right. But it's actually a pretty freeing concept.
How so?
Well, if our identity isn't wrapped up in what we own, then we're less likely to cling to it so tightly, to hoard it. We can use what we have more freely, share it more readily. And it's not just about giving away our excess, it's about seeing ourselves as, stewards of what we've been given.
I like that. So it's about like loosening our grip a little bit. And that story about the seminary student and his dad giving their change to the unhoused man, that really illustrates this idea of like mutual generosity.
It does. It's a beautiful example of how bridging the chasm doesn't have to be this one-way street of like charity.
Right.
They share this moment of giving, and then they need to ask for, a quarterback.
Yeah.
And it highlights our shared humanity, the fact that we all need each other sometimes. It opens up this possibility for like reciprocity in unexpected places.
Yeah, it's about connecting on a human level, not just a transactional one.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
And that story about Central Presbyterian Church in Atlanta, where housed and unhoused people worship together, that's another powerful example of this.
Oh, yeah, especially that note in the offering plate.
Oh, man, that gets me every time. That unhoused man placing a note that says, "I love you very much,"
Mhm.
into the offering plate. It's so powerful. It cuts through all the, socioeconomic differences
Mhm.
and just speaks to this core human need for love and belonging.
Right, it's like a pure expression of connection. So finally, let's bring in Psalm 41, verses 1 through 3,
Okay.
and see how it connects with all this. So verse 1 says, "Blessed are those who have regard for the weak. The Lord delivers them in times of trouble." What stands out to you there?
I think that word regard, to really see someone, to pay attention to them, that's key. It goes back to the parable, right?
Yeah.
Where the rich man just didn't have any regard for Lazarus at his gate.
Yeah.
And the psalm is saying that caring for the vulnerable, it's not just a nice thing to do, like spiritual weight.
I see.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's pretty clear that the story of the rich man and Lazarus, it's not just some fairy tale about what happens after we die.
It's not.
It's a call to action, It's about examining those chasms that we allow to form both in our own lives and in our society as a whole.
Right. And those divides, they can be about income, sure, but they can also be about differences in beliefs or life experiences, anything that keeps us from seeing each other's humanity.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think the key takeaway here is that true wealth, it's not about how much stuff we accumulate, but about our ability to connect with others, especially those who are struggling.
Exactly.
It's about fostering that spirit of mutual generosity, not just top-down charity.
And I think what's important to remember is that we have a choice. We have agency.
Yeah.
We can either contribute to widening those chasms, or we can actively work to bridge them through empathy and connection.
That's a powerful thought to leave us with.
It is.
So for all of you listening, think about the great chasms in your own life. What are they? Are they about money, about beliefs, about something else? And what's one small, intentional step you could take today to start bridging one of those gaps? It's a question worth sitting with. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.